Hello, and welcome back to Sustainable Culinary Solutions. I am Ali Gonzalez, and this is my video podcast. Um, Many of you are wondering because you see sometimes Cooking with Ali, and you see some of the cooking classes that I present online, and and then you see some of this commentary that I started bringing in. I believe the food industry is filled with a lot of food shows and TV shows, and you see all this Instagram with these cooking classes and everything, and movie studios where you see all this stuff and it looks fantastic and great, but it doesn't really tell you the real life and a day in a life of what a chef goes through or what a cook goes through or the truth about the food service industry. And when you think about it, mostly small businesses, unless you're a big corporation, but big corporations have their issues also. But the small businesses, within 1 year to 2 years, I would say at least 7 or 8 of them go out of business. So I'm hoping whether I help one, 10, 1,000, I'm not looking to attract 1 million views. If I do, I do. If it not, as long as I help people and they can succeed, and this narrows the gap down. Currently working with about 4 small business owners right now, and it's the same thing every time. They really don't have the tools to move ahead. They may be a great chef, they may have a great idea, they may be a great business person, but they don't have the whole total industry package and what really goes on, and how to sign contracts, what to look for, and how to protect themselves. And they go into this business in this industry, and absolutely no help. They're trying to do it themselves, and if they do have someone on the side of helping them, they're giving them the wrong information, and that's why they lose thousands of dollars. If you're a big corporation, they open up really big, make all this money, and then they sell and get out, and another corporation comes and buys them out, and then quality goes down, portion size goes down, and you start to see all this stuff. So little by little, you're going to see we have some guests on talking about small businesses and what they did, how they succeeded or they didn't succeed, how they had to close their business down. And this is going to be helpful for the industry if you want to get into it or you are in it and you want to buy something. So helpful tips like this, or just for that sake, if you're just at home and you want to understand how menu writing is done or how to order at a restaurant, what are my qualifications, you may ask? Well, I've worked in over, I would say, maybe 38, 40 states, North Carolina, all over Texas, all over New York, and California, and New Orleans. So when you think about it, I've traveled. I understand the Midwest to back east to the West Coast, and I understand their sustainability practices. I've worked in 3 major movie studios, 3 major hotels, private catering business, small restaurants, and corporate food service. So when you ask about 35 years of experience in traveling doing all this food, I understand the culture and where it came from, so I can actually explain to you the history of food. And mostly it's because I listen to people, and I understand. And eating in thousands and thousands of restaurants, you tend to understand the quality and the service. And over 35 years, I've seen the industry change so much that you would be surprised at the information I have. So right now, why I'm calling this Day in a Life as a Chef, and this is going to be a very short version. The truth about all this is going to happen is that I'm going to actually write a book, at least 5,000 pages long, of my 35 years in the industry. And it's going to tell you about hotels and restaurants and corporate dining, and it's going to tell you some great stories that I've even forgotten, stories that I haven't even told people in my life. And there's some great stories, there's some wonderful stories behind it. But with that, there's corruption, just like any other business. And I'm probably going to need an attorney to display that. Probably won't put names in it, but there's corruption, and it extends from HR to vice presidents to corporations. There's moving numbers, and it just keeps going on and on there. Tell you the truth, I started this industry at the age of 13 years old, and when I finally did my college application, I was just going to go to a local trade school, and I had a girlfriend in high school that really inspired me and told me, because I knew the top two culinary schools in the United States, and they were California and San Francisco, and then New York. And she told me, if you don't, go and do what you love and choose the best, you're going to regret it the rest of your life. And I'm glad I took her advice. And I went to San Francisco Culinary Academy, and being one of the youngest at that time, there was no 18-year-olds. It was tough, but I learned a lot, and I listened, and I walked. I didn't run. And the great thing about being in San Francisco, it's one of my favorite cities in all the United States. I mean, there's some great cities out there, but San Francisco, really social and culture and diversity, and people are very kind, and you got everything from coffee and from fresh, organic, local coffee companies to restaurants with local ethnic foods. You can't get some better ethnic foods, from Thai to Asian, and they have some great pizza places. I mean, I know they talk about New York's pizza, but downtown North Beach, they have some great pizza places, and I found some hole-in-the-wall restaurants that you wouldn't believe. Now, over the years, I've seen times and time has changed, and the quality of food has changed in a way which I never believed it would have. And this propaganda now that you see online, that you see all these chefs showing off what they can do, and the pictures, and doesn't necessarily mean that it's great. I think Instagram is just, everyone wants to just go and put filters on everything and make everything look great, and become famous, getting followers. And back in the early 90s, we didn't take pictures. We didn't have to show off. We just did our job, and we worked 18 hours a day. And when you think about 35 years of being in this industry and working in all these places I worked at and all the travel, I believe that it was a great education. I won't change it for anything else. But with all the pleasures of being in this food industry, there was a lot of heartache and pain. And I'm hoping to display this on this book so that everyone understands. And it's a great thing to really, one of the greatest pleasures in this world is eating and dining out. And when you go into a restaurant, you see how wonderful it can be when you dine, especially in a really fine dining restaurant. And a lot of those are gone now. And I worked in one of them at one time, and it's pitch black, and you have some of the best fillets, some of the best entrees that you can imagine coming out, and it's the wow factor. And it's rare to find that wow factor. After dining in thousands of restaurants, and I've eaten some of the best steakhouses in New York and Texas and different places that I've dined at, and some of them are just a total disappointment. When I found small hole-in-the-wall places in Plano, Frisco, and in Texas, and I was wowed by them, actually. And so as it goes, I had a great career. I even worked in a Swedish bakery at one point, and some bakeries and hotels. And, I have stories that come in from, I would say, in the middle of the night at 2:00 in the morning, where I'm in the back baking off Danish and mixing up bread, and a guy out of nowhere just shows up and starts attacking a woman, trying to rape her and kill her. It just extends to that far of some of these stories that I have, and they're really, really interesting. And it wasn't just that. I mean, I smashed George Burns' 100th birthday cake at a hotel, and I think it was 20 years old, and then I panicked. But I mean, the stories are just great, and I've worked with a lot of movie stars, producers, and mayors all across California, and I worked in $14 and $20 million homes. And as you work there as a chef, and I was just a cook at the beginning, and just growing up the ranks to an executive chef, to a district chef, to a corporate chef, and then a district manager, to an assistant vice president, to a CEO of a culinary school. And you learn, to listen, you learn to be more humble, and to address things differently, and learn to keep your mouth shut. as the world has turned into an HR world. And that's where a lot of things have turned around. I believe in 2005, that's where you never really knew who HR was until then. But HR was more corrupt than any of them all. I don't think I've met any HR department that wasn't, um, you know, stealing money or doing something wrong with the employees that should have been done. And these stories are going to be told. They have to be told. I think it's another side of the business that you go to a bookstore and they have thousands of books, cookbooks all over the place, and I plan on writing one, but they don't tell you the stories that behind this. I mean, there hasn't been a place that I haven't worked at where somebody was stealing, from $50 a day in a register to $200 to $10,000 a month. But it wasn't just the average employee, it was corporate, moving numbers around, you know, um, you know, not using the accurate budgets that they told the clients, and the clients never knew it, and it could have been from $100,000 to $200,000, $300,000 a year in falsifying budgets. So you'll be shocked. You'll be shocked at the stories that I have to tell. And I think it's been a wonderful life, and I've grown so far in this industry, and I'm humbled to it. I still learning every day that I do my work, and it's directed me in a different direction now, from what it was, because I had passion for food. I delivered a Caesar salad on a chilled plate with the hearts of romaine, with fresh dressing, with real anchovies and lemon juice, and everything that goes into a Caesar salad dressing. You can taste the garlic, you can taste the flavor of this, and in a chilled fork. So when you ate it, it was crisp, it was bold and fresh croutons, and now it's boxed croutons. It's mixed romaine with the tops on. It's wilted, and it's there's not a chilled fork, there's not a chilled plate. I went to a restaurant a while back, just recently, and it's you walk in and it's talking about the ACF, and it's ranked, and it's one of the top restaurants. And I said, okay, we're going to order all these appetizers and entrees. And one of the appetizers I ordered sounded great, because I love cheese and I love prosciutto, and it was on a crostini with brie and prosciutto, and I believe it had I don't know, a fig preserve on it. When I ate it, the crostini tasted like it was baked off days ago and stuck in a container with a lid, and it was cold. And the brie was just sliced cold. It wasn't even, properly tempered for the crostini. And then the prosciutto looked old, and it was pre-sliced, or it came pre-sliced, but it wasn't fresh prosciutto. And then the preserve was out of a jar. You would have figured that in a fine dining restaurant they would have made it better. And it just goes on and on. You read these menus and they sound fantastic, and they're not. But this is about my travels, and this is going to be a part of the book about traveling and eating in thousands of restaurants. And the opportunities that I've had that not too many people have, is that I had a passion for this and I loved it. It wasn't talent. I don't believe there's talent in this industry. I believe you have to love it, because you have to be crazy to work 7 days a week at 18 hours. I worked 32 hours straight one time, and then some. I worked 2 jobs, or was running back and forth to hotel. And the wonderful thing about this is that the knowledge just kept coming in. And even when I worked at some really bad places with some really crazy, I would say, employees, and they just wouldn't show up to work, always late, always excuses, and you're running around, you learn to organize yourself, you learn to better yourself, to prepare for this, and those type of employees. And trust me, I've had some employees, in these stories I'm going to tell, I call it actually the Craigslist 200, where there's about 200 of these cooks and food service workers, and they change their resume constantly. And these are the teachings when you hire my company and when I work with you, that I warn you about, because I've interviewed thousands of employees. I worked with thousands, and I've made some bad hires. Don't get me wrong. You learn as you go. But as I call it, the 200 on Craigslist, is that they changed their name, they changed their resume to fit the opportunities that they're looking at. And what they do is they go into and they find these places, and they find where they're not doing timekeeping properly, um, and they know that they're breaking rules and laws, and they look for the harassment lawsuits, and they keep suing companies one at a time. And you'll be amazed. They don't talk about this. They don't show this in the papers and the news. You see food shows and they're competing and they're showing you these fancy meals that cost $200 for you to make, but they don't teach you about the industry. And it's hard to train and teach management about this nowadays and what to look for. And that's why I'm here. And this is where I'm going to tell my story. And it's going to be a great one. And I've seen it all. You're in court half the time. And nowadays it's all about HR, 80% of your time, 90% of your time in the restaurant industry. And I've heard this from small business owners that say they can't do their job every day because employees are on heroin or they're on drugs, or they don't show up, or they're stealing from them. And it's the constant same story over and over and over again. But I lived a decent life. I trained everyone I worked with. I made sure they understood what I was looking for. I would go in there and study the operation. I'd break down the walk-ins and the coolers, and just make sure that I reorganized them so I can actually capture the inventories just by visualizing it. So if it was theft, I can catch it right away. POS systems, I set it up so they couldn't steal, and you would catch it right away. And these are the things that the book is going to tell you, and they're going to tell you about all these thefts and what they did and how they did it, and but they're also going to talk about the great things about the food industry. When some people say, "Oh, you worked in some shady places," well, let me tell you something. You don't make the chef mad, or the cooks mad, or the waiters or waitresses mad because they do step on your food and do spit on it. And I've seen it over the years. And everyone says, "No, that's not the reality." No, it is the reality of the business. I know how to order menus because I know that if they have double salmon or double chicken on the menus, they're trying to get rid of it. And if they put seafood chowder for the day, is they're getting rid of the leftover seafood that's probably not good. Or they're marinating the chicken that's going old. I'll tell you how the food has changed, where chicken would go bad within 2 or 3 days, and now it lasts 8 or 10 or 12 days because they're gas flushing it. I've gone to slaughterhouses for beef. I've watched production of chicken, where somebody's actually in a warehouse and one person cuts the wings off and it's on a conveyor belt going around. And it's got some amazing things out there that no one really knows how the food industry really works, or how the food chain works. And how the vendors work, and which ones steal the least from you, and how charges get added onto your bill. And I think with my 35 years in the industry, and although I'm portraying all this stuff to you here on my video podcast, there was a lot of great things that I've done, like I said, and the reason why I grew and I got even more hungrier, and I just thought I was going to be an executive chef my whole life, and it changed. But at some point when you're working in these homes and you see, what they do, and how expensive these homes are, you want that. So you want to go after that. And it's not that I sold out, it's just that I realized I wanted to become something more. And there was a lot of money in the food industry. I mean, I turned around, I never had to pay for anything. The vendors, I was buying $1 million in food for one location at a time. And the vendors always want to make sure you're happy. My son was born, and I came back, and there was 30, 40 presents from every vendor all over the desk. I never had to pay for Disneyland. We got to go out to eat on the vendors constantly, play golf at some really fine club resorts. And as I got, higher up the ladder, I didn't have to pay for a car, didn't have to pay for gasoline or car insurance or a cell phone or fast tracks. All these perks came in. So the industry has done well for me, and done very well. And and it's only because I was stubborn enough not to change what I wanted and how I cooked. I made everything from scratch. Go in at 4 o'clock in the morning just to get the muffins baked off and make sure there was fresh Danish, and and I had to learn it all. Croissants, puff pastry. It isn't something I haven't cooked or made in my lifetime. And pushing that quality and that consistency and that freshness everywhere I worked paid off. A lot of corporate companies started buying other companies, so they wanted you to buy that soup, they wanted you to buy that product or put that base in there and not make a fresh stock. And I refused to, and I got in so many arguments and fights where corporate executives just walked out of there cussing my name out, and you would have figured I'd have been fired over and over again. But the problem was, they could sell me, they could sell the client, no matter how stubborn I was and how hard I fought to put freshness and quality. I went to school to become a chef, and I wasn't going to change that. I wasn't going to sell that out and buy pre-made. Nowadays, you have to adjust. It's all corporate. A lot of it's processed. And when you think about procurement now taking over, procurement did not exist in the 90s or 80s. Chefs were buying from whoever they want, wherever they want, and they were taking kickbacks. So a lot of vendors were paying them off and adding it to the restaurant, adding it to, so if you should have paid for a case of tomatoes $8, they charged 10 and the chef got the 2. And, you know, some of them made thousands and thousands of dollars every month. I would never take a dime. I refused to. And this happened in the industry for several years. But then I would say in the 2000s, things changed where a lot of these corporate companies got bigger and bigger and bigger and started buying all these smaller companies, and they started taking over the buying power. You know, that's another trick. And I don't think a lot of clients knew how that works. But you know, when you consolidate your buying and consolidate the products, and you go directly to the farmers or the manufacturers, yes, you get a cheaper price, but you can still charge a higher price to the account. And you know, it just goes into layers after layer after layer in this food industry, from equipment to uniforms to IT, and it just goes on and on. So how the food industry really works, you know, when you're a small business owner, you don't understand how it works, you really don't make a lot of money. You lose it. There's just too much cost, too much to do. When you're big corporations, there's millions and millions of dollars to be made, and not just at the unit or the location or at the restaurant itself. It's behind the scenes with procurement. It's so much more money to be made in every other way. But if you're not careful, you don't have the insurances. You know, I think the food industry is probably one of the highest sued industries out there. There's tons of lawsuits, and it's because the harassment in the workplace. It's because the timekeeping is probably one of the biggest lawsuits out there for not taking breaks, not taking them properly. And, you know, it just goes on and on. And you know, in the old days, everyone went in to cook and to do their job, and they were excited about it. Now, these employees know the system, and they're coming in to sue you, believe it or not. And that's why the high turnover rate. You know, it all happened right around 2005, 2007. I started seeing more and more HR directors, and you can't have just any HR director. You have to have an attorney nowadays working for you. But again, I had a blast in this industry. I cooked for so many people. I cooked thousands of meals, and I learned, and some of the best steaks I've ever had in my life. And, you know, I'll be able to rate and grade these restaurants in the book. So again, this is my channel. You know, I have several stories, and it's not just one story. I mean, I can tell you, and every day another story just pops up in my head, and it's everything from customers walking into the restaurant I was working at and handing me $100 to go and eat at this local other restaurant because they wanted me to go and try their duck or try something. And the great thing about being a chef is that you have taste buds that grit so strong, and you could taste the flavor of the ginger and, you know, and the sugar and everything, and you can go back and recreate that. They would send me to movies. They would just say, you know what, your food is just so amazing. It reminds me of my mom, you know, in the old days, and my grandma. And, you know, just traveling, I think the biggest thing I got out of traveling was the culture. You know, I learned from Philippine culture, to their food, to their soy sauce vinegar, to El Salvadorians, to Texans, to the people in the South and the Southerners. and the lay of the land and what they use and from the ingredients and why they use that, to Jamaicans, to Colombians, to New Yorkers, and their type of food, to the West Coast and the sustainable practices. I would even go to the compost sites and learn about composting and paper products, and what is legal, what isn't legal, and what are people using, what they're not using. And it just goes on and on and on. And there's just layers and layers to this industry. So I hope that I can help some people with these podcasts and direct them in the right direction without losing money. It's getting worse as you see it. I can't see myself buying a restaurant right now. If I did, I was only going to pay cash. With hyperinflation, everyone says inflation. No, it's going to be hyperinflation, and it's coming down. It's going to hit pretty hard. It's not even there yet, even though we've seen costs rise in the last 2 years. I've seen chicken in the last couple of years from $2.90 in wholesale go all the way up to $5.10 recently, and that's very high price to pay for chicken breasts. But the industry right now is going to hit a mark that none of us are going to be able to understand. And again, it's getting more and more into processed, where I was so proud as a young kid coming up in the industry and cooking and making all this stuff from scratch and doing all these events and these parties for all these people. And that's why they hired me. Movie producers, I was in their homes cooking meals for them and their guests as they're discussing the production of a new movie coming up. And it just, many of those items and those types of events have gone away, and you see it more to processing and procurement and buying things pre-done and just pushing them out. And it's the future, and it's something I don't believe in. But again, you may see all this stuff on Instagram and on the social medias and then on TV. It's not realistic. It's not the real world, and it's not the world we live in. When every corporation is buying out another corporation and buying another corporation, a sick one that's ready to file Chapter 11. It just keeps going on and on and on, and the food quality is getting worse. And it's funny because being in the industry, I watched a really great restaurant, whether it was a restaurant chain or it was just a brand new restaurant by itself, opening up, and they throw all the bells and whistles at it, and the food is amazing, the service is amazing, and then within 1 year, the quality starts to decline, the portion sizes start to change. That's when they sold, or their product costs and their labor costs were too high and they couldn't meet their margins that they needed to meet. So they take that $150,000, $200,000 chef and they get the sous chef at $60,000, $80,000, and then they start cutting staff members and consolidating and portion sizing. And if it was a dozen oysters, it goes down to 9 oysters or 6 oysters, and the price gets hacked up. And you start to see the quality change because it doesn't have that professionalism, and only because it's the bottom line, they can't afford to keep doing business that way. And you would see the wine lists start to change. And we'll talk about the menus and wine lists and what's happened in the last, I would say 15 years with wine and the decline of wine and alcohol, and how much money they make on alcohol in most restaurants. So all this stuff is going to be told. It's going to be a tell-all. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope you listen to it. I think there's a lot of great information out there for those that dine, those that want to get into the industry, those that are in the industry and looking to know where to go next, what's the next move. And again, I lived a great life. I think there was a point in my life within 2 years I made $500,000. Where it went, I don't know. I think the IRS took it more than half of it. But there's money to be made. There's good money. And it was a great industry, and it paid off well, but it's starting to shrink now because the institutions are taking it over. And so when you're planning to open up a restaurant, or you are in the industry and you want to grow, or you want to grow as an executive chef, because there's less and less training out there, there's less cooks, there's less employees, and the costs are just increasing so high that many of us are not going to be able to keep up on. So this is a small view into the life. It's not even, I can go on for weeks and days and hours if I really structure this. right now I'm structuring the book, and I believe it's going to have so many different layers into it. Some great, fantastic stories where, I'm in the kitchen half the time when I was working my catering events or anywhere, and you would see the guests come into the kitchen and want to talk to me. And then they would hire me and tell me, I want a better party than that one you put out there, because they want to show their guests. And they're willing to pay anything. You could make $3,000 a day, $5,000 a day, and receive tips, gratuity up to $1,000 or more. It was a very generous industry, and there's lots of money to be made. It's just, you have to know how to do it. You have to know how to manage it, and you have to put the quality and consistency and put something out there that no one else has seen, and making sure that you can do it. But it was all done through time and error. So when I made mistakes and I had to spend 2 or 3 hours afterwards cleaning up, when I learned how to do things and reorganize them where I wouldn't have to. Long days, getting up at 4 in the morning, getting home at 3 o'clock in the morning. But it paid off. And I'm grateful for the industry. I wouldn't have changed it for anyone or anything else, to be in this industry. And, again, these stories have to be told, and they're great stories. And again, working in Swedish bakeries and hotels and restaurants and movie studios and corporate companies, I gotta tell you, I've seen it all. I've heard it all. I've been a part of it, with the good and the bad. There's a lot to be said, and I think that it needs to be told finally. Okay. Well, anyways, thank you. Please subscribe and like, and